narrative. It's the whole the whole idea of like that you can choose from a set of options in the universe. It's a myth. It's an illusion. So for a long while, I was interested in these kind of interactive, physical interactive, and questioning the modalities of interactivity in my career, which led me to curate and also contribute to this large-scope media called Uncharted, User Frames in Media Art. So for this project, we teamed up with ZKM and Ars Electronica, and to bring together more than 80 pieces, which are interactive by nature and which questions the sculptural quality of the viewer within the gallery space. For example, this project, Philikist, is about people visiting the museum and having their passport shots like in a cabin, and then their photographs becomes the content of the museum. Or in this one, like there's this immersive installation in which the viewers basically come and play with these bubbles, like interactive projection bubbles. But what the other people are watching is the drop shot of the people who are interacting with the bubbles that creates the artwork. Or in this one, Reactable, this is a piece which we commissioned from Austria. It's about these pattern recognition system. Each plug creates a different sound, and like 4 or 5 people come together and play with these plugs and their location on the table. They create a sound piece, and what the other visitors are experiencing is basically the experience of the players on the table. So the whole idea of this show was to investigate the position of the user within the media art scene. And the name was coming from a famous novel by William Gibson. The novel called is Neuromancer. And in an interview in which William Gibson talks about this book, this is the book that he defines cyberspace, basically. He says there are no maps for these territories, so having no map, we decided to title the exhibition as Uncharted. So it's kind of an uncharted territory. You don't really know what's going on between the work and the piece. So for a long while, like this kind of works occupied my agenda for writing and research and producing similar. Pedagogically, I was interested in this kind of work, and a month after the exhibition, we working on this pedagogical project called Pixelist, in which we invited all these practitioners from different places all over the world, and so everybody brought their own pedagogical models, and so to teach interaction and digital media, and to find the common ground. So I mean, the international component practice, because once we are using similar tools like these computers and software and circuitry, so basically we are using the same language. So it doesn't really matter that it kind of blurs the national boundaries, the devices that we are using. They create their own culture. So there was like a circuit bending workshop and movement workshops in which people like test motion capture and reflect motion in a digital sphere. I don't know if I can skip this one. Yeah, let me skip this one. And the year after this pedagogical survey, digital media and interaction, we decided to narrow down it a little bit to a more to a more generative path. And so we organized this design-oriented community summer courses series in which all participants came up with some ideas which can be programmed in a generative fashion and just be implemented in a few days time frame. Okay. I'm teaching now at Rutgers University in New Jersey. So, for example, this will be the first day of class. This is a basically a tablecloth, or you can make a, it's really nothing, but it's kind of paves the way to complex systems in a visual way. So, and also at this point, I also need to refer to archaeology of this approach to generative pattern system, which is procedural drawing and generative, creating generative, for example. Sol Levy had all these like 3-part wall drawings which are written on a piece of paper, right? Or Namjoon Paik had, which tells to a poor person to take a cab and observing the meter. So which is very instructional. There is no visual, but the whole same thing. So when you look at the work, there's nothing but like lines of code. But the compilation of the brings the visuals. So this idea of procedural drawing and generative thinking is the archaeology of the general idea of data. So this kind of leads to more use. For example, to understand the patterns of city bike use in New York City. So these are 3 different maps, which shows us different aspects of the city bike usage in July 1st of 2013. So this one is the gender map. So the blue line male riders, and the pink ones are the female riders, and the white ones are unidentified. So these data are provided by City Bike, because whenever you use a credit card in these stations, so the transaction basically marks where you started your trip, where you ended your trip, and your gender, right? So some credit card companies don't include the gender information, but some credit cards also provide the gender information. And this information is openly served by Citybike. So, for example, this one, using the same data set, so this time we are looking at the duration. So, and in this case, the duration is not like a binary opposition. It's a continuous process, right? So, so in to have a transient color grade, and the red lines represent the longer rides, and the green lines represent the shorter lines, shorter rides. So I don't know if it is perceivable, but so basically we are looking at Manhattan and down the 53rd Street, and so down there is the Brooklyn and through the bridges, and you can see how the Lower East Side is coming, right? So even without like using the geographical map, we were able to create the, cartographic system only through the looking at the city bike commuter lines. So the reason why I stress that, like, I operate in the artistic, scientific, and the political realm is, so these kind of maps are very political, basically. So looking at this map, one can argue that, well, this, in the beginning, like a very open and democratic system. So you'll be renting a bike for, let's say, 5 minutes to an hour. And so you don't need to own your bike. It's a very lightweight system. And it's, so, but this map, one can argue that, well, actually, this is a male system. Only men are using this. So what are the women? Why are not the women are using this system? So, and then you can start questioning the system. Or if you're not at a point to question the system, you can start questioning the public authorities who are commissioning this system, right? So, basically, public system, and this public system works for the men, not for the woman, right? So, this kind of things yield to serious political implications. So this is a little bit more funny one. So again, this is a mapping project of New York that I created with one of my students. And so this is a building stock map of New York through the rat's point of view. So this data is coming from 311. So whenever you see a rat, you can call 311 and call the rat that you saw. And they take a record, and I don't know if they're coming to get the rat, but so they take the record. That's the point that I'm interested in. And so, and also when you call 311 to complain about the rat, you also tell you what kind of a building you're calling from. So you might be calling from a commercial construction site or a school or a preschool or parking lot. So I asked my student to illustrate these 10 different rats for me. So for each building type, she drove a rat. And for each and every call that we saw in the database, we placed a rat on that point. So this created the rats map of New York City. So you can see some rats trying to cross the Fire Island Bridge over there, which are called on the bridge. So basically, this is a way to look at not the rats, but the building distribution of New York City. So you can see is much more dwellings and schools and preschools. And if you look at downtown Brooklyn, it's more, parking lots and construction sites, the developing area. If you look at Manhattan and mostly commercial buildings, less residential. And if you go up to Bronx or to Far Rockaway, Queens, again, it becomes like family dwellings and schools and preschool buildings. So basically, the rats are just have some indexical value in terms of showing the building stock map of New York City. So again, another very which can yield to like political results is a flight pattern map. So in this one, we are looking at the flight data. And so again, the colors represent the distances. So the greener is, the blues are the shorter distances, and the green lines are medium distance, around 5,000 kilometers. Longest distance is around 10,000 kilometers. So if you're looking at this map, so we see that, yeah, it makes sense. Like in America, there are short flights. In Europe, there are short flights, and there are transatlantic flights. But there's one thing is that just squint your eyes and look at the map. It's only the northern hemisphere is basically flying. Not that the southern hemisphere need to fly. I mean, they're for the heavily populated areas in the southern hemisphere, right? Like look at Sao Paulo, Mexico City, right? Or Nairobi is one of the most populated one of the most populated cities. So you don't see any flights. So it's not that they don't need to fly, but they don't have the economic means to fly, to support flights. So again, this becomes a very political statement about the distribution of wealth within the world. So it's always up in the north. It's not in the south. So this is another way to signify that the northern countries are wealthier than the southern countries in the world. Okay. So in a close look, it looks like this. So basically, it's like each circle is one of the airports, and the line between airports represents the Okay, so this is. I mean, these projects, whether they're commissioned or they're for research, or maybe, for example, this one has really no use for anyone not interested in the building stock of New York. And if you're interested in the building stock of New York, there are really thousands of books in the libraries that you can really look very useful material. So these have, like, let's say this has some pedagogical value and this has some political value. But you know, whether political or scientific or pedagogical, I think a designer or an artist needs to be in this data world, because as we're living in the digital age and within the, you know, every step that we take is data, right? So you do something, it's data. When you don't do something, it's again a piece of data, right? So in this one, you're not flying, it's a piece of data, it's part of the map. When you're flying, it's a part of the map also. Tweeting, yes, you're a part of the big data. And if you're not tweeting, again, oh, why these guys are not tweeting? That's another data, right? So we are pieces of this big industry. So another quote, like another of my favorite quote, life without industry is guilt, and industry without art is brutality. So art and design should be active within the new technologies and within the within these systems in order to make and in order to humanize the technology and humanize the ways of that, how we are dealing with this surveillance culture. So from now on, I'm going to show a few of my personal projects, which were research-driven design projects in the artistic context. So I stress the artistic context because I believe that contemporary art scene is one of the scenes which can truly host politics. So I mean, having never been to an art school, I actually didn't have any discipline. So I don't really consider myself as a photographer or a videographer or a designer. So basically, it's about the expression. And in order to create an effective presentation, I think today one needs to fluidly move between various media. And also, the working environment kind of helps that, because once you're using your computer, basically, it simulates all the environments, right? So, today it's easier to do. So logical order. But I want to create some sort of thematic transitions. And looking at the territory and the conflicts, last year I was commissioned by this exhibition about the centennial anniversary of the Great War, the First World War as we know it. And so I wanted to create a piece which tries to understand what was about the First War. So, but whatever archives that you dig into about the First World War, and try to understand, when it's ended. So there's always like a linear history, but actually none of them really reflects to the world that we are living in. So I was thinking that I decided to make a very simple thing. I went to Wikipedia and typed First World War. And I started like linearly, and like it started branching from First World War, like pages. And I realized that only the title of the page had the word used war. Like all the other conflicts, which is caused by the First World War over 100 years, they're not called war. So there's always like another term which replaces the World War. So for example, what's going on in Israel and Palestine right now, it's a barrage. or what's going on between Turkey and the Kurdish area, the civil. It's not a war, it's a conflict. Or what's happening between China and Japan, it's a clash. I say war, but politically I believe that it's actually about the First World War has never ended. So all these conflicts that we are experiencing right now today within the world is the repercussions of the same war, including the Second World War, of course. And so I picked up all these conflict areas and I gathered all these war zones, satellite images, and so I created this animation, and all these words are being pulled from Wikipedia in order to describe that battle zone within the world. So this led to another commission around the same subject, and this one, the overarching theme was multiculturalism, and I started working with the war. So I tried to look from more like an American perspective, and I basically realized that Americans learn a lot from these wars. And I was thinking like a 19-year-old Texan, getting on an airplane and flying to Iraq there, really. And probably it's the first time he or she leaves the country and, sees like different from a different language, a different ethnicity, a different religion. And I started researching this thing, which turned out to be true. So more than half of the Americans traveling, they're traveling not for pleasure, they're traveling for, not all of them are fighters really on the battleground, but has a lot of these battle zones, either or for fighting. So long story short, I started tapping into their Twitter and Instagram accounts. I started gathering their photographs that they casually put on their social accounts. And so in order to do this, like I will choose one American base in Afghanistan or in Iraq and define a radius. Like I will just look at the radius of 2 miles or 5 miles, and I will just filter the English written tweets or Instagram posts. And I collected all these photographs. So there are like literally hundreds of these photographs, which I call like contemporary postcards from the zone, from the war zones. And some of them are naive, some of them are aggressive. For example, like the one with the bird is my favorite. Checking my bird is starting to take up a lot of my day. So probably it's they have some sort of a room to like have bird in the army. Or so this one with the checkers and backgammon, they're either NATO troops love backgammon or hate checkers, because backgammon boxes are less than the checkers. Or they food, they write about the people that they see around. So I created these postcard series, tapping into these digital networks. And so this is another project about Occupy Wall Street. So this was the year that I moved to New York, and I was very impressed with what's going on within the park. And I will go there and make like video footage. I didn't really know what to do with the footage really, and I didn't really there are tons of footage. Like of course it's a very great moment for everyone to document. And so I decided to use a similar technique. Actually, this was earlier than the previous one, chronologically. So I set the dates of the occupation of the park, and I set the park as the central location. And I looked around a mile radius from the park, and I looked at all the tweets with the hashtag OWS hashtag. I started that in the beginning. I didn't have the idea, but I started observing that this idea of occupation is not Wall Street, it's not about only the Zuccotti Park, but people are to like formulate it in a different way. So this idea of occupation basically needs to be like everywhere. And I started, there are a lot of words coming next to occupy when in the tweets, which is posted with like hashtag OWS. And so I isolated all these words. I mean, there are real, like literally thousands of them. So this is just a sample of the work. And it lists the next one or two after the Occupy. So Occupy New Brunswick, Occupy Judaism, Occupy Main Street, Occupy with Solidarity. So whatever is coming, it's, and with these keywords, I roughly edited the footage and turned it into a database. And for each word, there will be like a random footage coming up. And so it's a generative video editing work commissioned on the occasion of Occupy Wall Street. So, I mean, these are some sort of like a research diamond. This work to me is, it's more dear to my heart because it's very minimal and it represents like a lot of layers of meaning, and in a very simplistic way. So this piece is called Evacuate Istanbul, and so by the time, this is way back, this is 2009, the time that I was living in Istanbul. So in this one, I was commissioned to make a piece for that billboard on the top of the one of the fancy hotel buildings in Istanbul, downtown Istanbul, and it's Marmara Pera Hotel. And every month in a year, they would commission an artist to use the billboard for an artistic purpose instead of a advertisement. And so when I got the commission, I started thinking all different aspects of the project. First of all, the thing is the screen is very low resolution. It's just like 360 to 240 pixels. So it's like sort of a YouTube video, basically. So, you know, that wouldn't really make sense to shoot something like to show these. And also, like, this has this huge electronic billboard. So I wanted to do something responsibly for okay, so what's about the city? And so I don't know, I think it's my pessimist side is the first thing that I was thinking was the earthquake, because it's something which is going to destroy the city in Istanbul, which is oftentimes neglected and oftentimes you know, people don't want to talk about it, but it's the fact. It lies on this fault line and there's a big earthquake coming to Istanbul, whoever knows when, but it's going to happen at some point. And so I started working with the Observatory Center in Istanbul, Observatory Center, and I figured out that at the beginning of my research, my first finding was earthquakes happen all the time. It's the only ones that we are hearing are the ones over magnitude 4, so which starts like being felt a little bit, but the earthquakes are happening all the time. There's like a subterranean mobility going on all the time. So, but they're just in the observatory centers, but of course, nobody's interested in them. So, this was my first finding. And also thinking about Istanbul, another neglected thing, aside from the earthquake, is Anatolia. When Istanbul, in a way, is like New York a little bit. When you're living in Istanbul, you don't really think of the country. And and also it's an immigrant city, like a lot of immigrants coming to Istanbul from Anatolia to make a living, again like New York. So I also wanted to emphasize this thing. So I started visualizing all the data which is available from this observatory center in real time, and designed this infographics to fit to this low resolution electronic board. And this whole design process was really challenging and fun at the same time, because I wanted to keep that thing legible, but the resolution is super low. And also there's like a distance, and every time it's not like designing for screen, because you can just test things, make a printout. But when you're designing for this, like every time, take the elevator downstairs, walk 50 meters back and check, and go back up to the computer. So it was like a very funny process between what you're designing and how it looks in the medium. So I refer to this book, a very useful book called Way Showing. It's about designing in scale. It's a very unique book, really, for urban graphics. And looked at all different typefaces, which will be more like only for legibility. I decided to use Windows, one of the Windows monospace system fonts called Consolas. So which, according to my test, which turned out to be the most legible monospace font. And so, anyways, after all these math and trial and errors and everything, I managed to keep it visible from down below on the top. So it's like a 50-meter high building, and the hypotenuse becomes like 70 meters from a legible distance. And so basically, in real time, it represents all the earthquakes. It gives the location name and the latitude and the latitude and the longitude of the earthquake and the magnitude of the earthquake. And the results were pretty fun, actually, because when I was walking around, I would ask people, especially the people who have been running business around, and they were like, "Oh, we don't know what these numbers are," because it also looks like a little bit like a broker board, like in Wall Street. So they were like, "This is not about dollar or euro, so what is this really about?" And I was, "Oh, it's about the earthquakes." "Oh, then why it says Bitlis?" For example, Bitlis is a remote city in Anatolia, like nobody really talks about it. But all of a sudden it comes to the top of, like in Istanbul, you see your hometown shining building. And which also, earthquakes, another layer of meaning for this project was, I started researching about geology. So why there's a fault line in Istanbul? It turns out that there are two peninsulas, which Istanbul is in between, the European Peninsula and the Arabic Peninsula. And they kind of push each other, and that creates that shear and break in the fault line. So again, like politically, it's felt very meaningful, because the whole idea of Turkish psyche is the whole idea of Turkish politics is about being between the European and the Eastern and the Western mind clashing each other. A very dense location like Istanbul. So the whole thing became very meaningful for me. So this led to some other commissions again, working with a similar data set. I opened up the data set to a more, not local, but in this one I'm using USGS, United States Geographical Survey Center data, and marking up all the earthquakes. But these are more useful for looking at the center. So these are commissioned by the center, and I'm also using them in my lab. I used to do it, then I stopped doing it because I realized that in New Jersey they don't know what the earthquake is really. So it took a few years for me to realize like it's a very foreign concept for my students. So I started doing other things. But for a while it was a good source of data because it has a lot of dimensions. It gives you the location and magnitude and depth, and so there are a lot of factors that we can play around. But these screens are being used for by the USGS people. And I don't know if they're the most useful ones. Of course, they have like hundreds of different types of interfaces that they can work around. But the one on the right-hand side was the red lines represent the magnitude of the earthquakes, and the gray lines represent the depth of the earthquakes. So I just started doing this just to test for something, and at some point we were corresponding, and they said, wow, this is amazing. And I said, well, it's not really, when the earthquake is deep underground, it's less effective, it's less dangerous. But on the graphics, it looks higher. So I think I said, there's something wrong with this design. They said, no, this is perfect. This is what we want. Because this has some sort of an indexical reference to what a seismograph does. What a seismograph does, I don't know if you've ever seen one, but there's this like pan basically like hooked up to the sensors, to the geologic sensors, and which draws the mobility. Although it's a wrong one, there's an indexical reference to a real seismograph by the graphics, so they decided to go with that one. And on the left-hand side one is like it's reprinting the name of the location over and over again, because when an earthquake happens, it just doesn't happen once, it happens like multiple times, one after the other. So it's writing on the same field with a few pixel error. So it's like basically creating a bolder look of the same type. So taking from these earthquakes, around the time the accident in Fukushima happened, and which led me to my latest research topic, which is about the nuclear mobility and radioactivity. And because I realized that basically one of the catastrophic consequences of the earthquake is the nuclear production. And so mostly for inspirational purposes and also kind of a childish curiosity, I wanted to visit Chernobyl because when it exploded in 1986, I was like 7 years old, and I really remember like how scary it was, and it's kind of one of my childhood memories. It's like 300 miles north of where I used to live in Turkey. And so I visited Chernobyl, and so these are some iconic images you can see pretty much in catastrophe. And so these images are from Pripyat. It's like a 20-mile north of Chernobyl area. The lodgement area for the workers who are working in Chernobyl. So I made these photographs, and so this is again like the same abandoned area. But and also for a day we took a tour with the authorities. They took us around, and so there's like a limited space that we can visit. But on the second day, that we realized that we can just like walk into this space like without nothing. But then we realized that, oh, okay, maybe we should be careful about really what's going on, because there is material still buried down there which is still radioactive, and half-life of 240,000 years. So humanity has to deal with this like 240,000 years more. So this, as a designer, kind of fascinated me because first of all, as the humanity, the earliest text today we can read is like 4,000 or 5,000 years old, right? So what's written before 5,000 years old, we can't really read those texts. So now we are trying to convey this information to future generations of 100,000 years later, and they will have to know that in 1986 this accident, there's active plutonium in this zone. So for me, it's okay, like I looked at all these maps, like did my homework, I read all the articles, all the research, and I kind of drew myself a map, like draw myself on the top. The pink areas that I shouldn't get closer, so these are more contaminated areas, and mostly blue areas seems to be safe for me. And this kind of a small estuary running within the space, this pink line, it's the one of the main channels which nation, so I shouldn't get used to that. So it's okay. I can protect myself, or I can give this map to you. If you want to go, you can use my map. But as a research question, it started being interesting. So how this information is going to be conveyed, and this actually holds for nuclear power plants, and all how this information is going to be conveyed. So coming back from Chernobyl, I kind of really sad, and like when you print them big, and like I didn't really want to have them like exhibition or anything, because it's basically looking at the sadness. But at the same time, I wanted to somewhat show all these photographs that I took, and so at the time I applied for a grant at Tennessee University about I wanted to show them online, and they supported the production of this website called zone.mutantspace.net. So Mutant Space is the overarching name for the project, and the zone is specifically the Chernobyl zone. So yeah, you can take a look at the website. It's online. It's basically the photographs and the words which were resonating in my mind by the time of the visit. So, but like this catastrophe in Chernobyl, and I was really fascinated with this idea of nuclear power production, and for its future implications, and current use and catastrophe potential. So after also moving to the United States, I started visiting all these nuclear power plants, and I started making photographs, and also making geographical surveys around the areas. And at some point I realized that all these power plants, so this is more after a intensive web search, all the nuclear power plants in the world, including Chernobyl, they're patented by 3 or 4 companies, not more. So I started looking at those companies who are authorizing these nuclear power plants, and I found something very funny about how they define the evacuation zones in case of a catastrophe. So they don't really give you a map, or they don't really tell people what to do in the case of catastrophe, but there's if you read the instructions carefully, they tell you some sort of a procedure that, in case of meltdown within the reactor, so 3 miles to the west is safe, and to the north is this much of contamination. So there's a procedure which reminded me the drawings of Sol Levy, this American painter. He would start with, okay, now you make the center of the paper to the other corner of the paper, and so it's a procedure being told, and you can create the drawing out of the procedure. So the evacuation zones are the same. So I'm looking at all these user manuals of the reactors, and I started drawing these mutant spaces basically within the photographs. So the upper right one is Chernobyl, and the lower one is 3 Mile Island. To the left, upper one is Salem Oyster Creek, New Jersey, and the lower one is again in New Jersey, Deepwater. So they're all very close to New York area. And in the final stage of this project, this is the ongoing part. I'm still working with, I'm looking at one particular nuclear power plant, which is Metsamor power plant in Armenia, very close to Turkish-Armenian border. And so this map actually tells the whole story about it. So the is the nuclear power plant, and there are 2 evacuation zones. One is used in 1988. It had a small explosion, and it's still operative. And all these lines that you see around the nuclear power plant, they are the fault lines. They are the earthquake zone within the nuclear power plant. And the blue area is the Turkish border, and the black and white part is the Armenian side. So it's a very, it gained also like not only all these issues between Armenia and Turkey kind of embodies within this reactor. First of all, the reactor is commissioned by the Soviet Republic back in the time, at the same time with Chernobyl, and has the same, runs on the same technology with Chernobyl without a container. And so in case of a meltdown, so there's nothing to be done. And so the whole, basically nuclear waste will be in the soil. And so this nuclear power plant lies on various different fault lines. So, and one of the biggest earthquakes actually here it shows, it's in the, which this red line is the one fault line in Turkey, which yielded a very horrendous earthquake like 3 years ago. And it's very close to there. And also this power plant is very close to two mountains, Sis and Mas. It's also known as Ararat, which is sacred for Armenians. So all these stories kind of converge into this, that the idea of catastrophe and the Noah's Ark. The Noah's Ark is supposed to land on Mount Ararat, according to Bible. And this earthquake and the relationship between the earthquake and the nuclear power plant, and the border, the proximity of the nuclear power border, and the cross-border effects of the nuclear power plant, but like very they're just stuck because of the current conflict between Turkish and Armenian states about the Armenian genocide. So nobody can really, so as a Turkish person, I can't really criticize Armenians because they will think that you're criticizing our nuclear power plant because you're Turkish. Or the whole reason is basically because the border is closed. Armenia is now a landlocked between Iran, Azerbaijan, and Turkey. And so there's only Georgia on the other side that they can have an open border. So they have to run the nuclear power plant, so there's no political solution for them. But there's no diplomatic relationship between Turkey and Armenia to discuss this. So again, like starting from a very visual and curious, like a very graphic curiosity, brought me to a very political matter, which is which can only freely be discussed in the context of art, because there is really no other platform that I can go and talk about this conflict as openly as I can do right now. So this is going to be an installation piece. Let me show you so this is the installation plan basically. So there will be like 3 screens, and all these visuals and photographs will be on the walls, and it's going to be an immersive space. In order to create this installation, I started looking at the material. I started looking into the material, and I realized that actually the nuclear technology is one of the least progressive technologies. So what humanity knows back in 1970s, we still don't know much more. And but it's kind of for the sake of security, I guess. Like genetic science is also like. So when you start talking about radioactivity or nuclear science, people say like, oh, it's like complicated, or we don't really know what's going on. And so I wanted to like create a piece which also demystifies and brings this like scared toy into the game. So I started researching online, like if I can any radioactive material, and it was very easy. It was very easy because you can order uranium samples from Amazon. It's just costs you like $15 to buy a piece of uranium, and USPS carries it and Amazon sells it. So and I realized that it's for the labs that they're using, and a Geiger counter on the right hand side, which is purchased from Spark Fund, like for $70. And these small lead bricks that you see on the upper right, so they are for isolating the uranium ore. So it's used for any kind of isolation purposes in hospitals and elsewhere. I basically created my own very small radioactive research laboratory by purchasing things on Amazon. And I started observing this radioactive material and hooking up the Geiger Arduino board, and I started observing the radioactive mobility of the uranium ore and using very similar algorithms that I used to do for the earthquakes. And so this is what the uranium mobility looks like. And I was looking, interesting. So of course then there are a lot of aesthetic decisions that I made here, like the size and the color and the orientation of the image. And I did like different versions. So then I realized that actually all these images are basically versions of this very, iconographic image to represent an atom, right? So this is from the NAN project. If you go to NAN project and type atom, this is what you get. And if you squint your eyes and look at this image, it's basically this image. So with this experiment, what I did was redoing what 1970s with some contemporary toys, let's say, that I'm playing with. Not in a physics lab, but it's just a small kit that you can purchase on Amazon and Spark Fund. And these are the different time frames. And it's really hard, it's kind of impossible to know which time frames we are looking at, because radiation is a lot more faster than the computer. So that also fascinated me, because computer was my main toy up until this age. So that was the fastest thing. Then I realized that, uranium can be even faster than the computer, that I can't detect the frames. So there's, the Arduino can work with only like, a couple of thousand millisecond precision. So this Geiger counter can detect a lot more frequent signals from the. So yeah, these are the work in progress visuals for this installation, which will be focused on one particular power between Armenia and Turkey, which opens up like other political discussions. Okay, so with all this work, actually there are two things that I want to discuss. The first, in the beginning, I always wanted, I kind of also had to like move from one, like photography is always beautiful, but has some sort of limitation in terms of how objective it is, how storytelling it is, but has a quality photographic representation. Whereas on the other side, not like supply problems. So now, in order to be successful within the data, the whole art and culture production is data driven. So whoever holds the data can make the next move within the scene. Yeah, I think these are two critical questions that I have in mind about my work and what's going on within the world with this data-driven world. So, so I don't know, maybe we can take from this example of, a similar, maybe. There are services probably you use, like Spotify, for example, is one, right? So it keeps you what you lacked before, right? And so I don't know, how do you feel about these two issues? One at a more entrepreneurial level, and the second question is about a visual level. At a visual level, how do you feel about the supply art or emotional flatness in information graphics versus temporal quality of photographic or videographic representation. Do you have any comments or like?
Do you think the most watched lists or recommendations on Spotify or Netflix kind of prompting you to do stuff? Do you think it's kind of them leading sometimes what people should watch? Like, do you think rather than straight numbers of things and having just data from that, they're kind of like prompting what should be watched, and then more people watch it that way, which might skew the numbers? Like, do you think that changes anything?
Well, I'm pretty sure every year they're having better algorithms, and these algorithms are basically trying to simulate each and every node system, and they're trying to like create different mirrors. But every time it boils down to the same question of so where is the and this one. So where is the input coming from? Where is the outside input coming to the system? So it's kind of easy to like create this feedback algorithms between the user and the system. But you know what's in this for the user? Like I already like these things, and and I'm already like an actor within this cultural sphere. So how do I learn something new, or how do I kind of advance my appreciation outside that algorithm? I mean, they're trying all crazy things, and one of them is, I recently read that one of these like music recommendation services, in order to randomize their algorithms, they're using nuclear material. A system like this that I'm using, so they're using this. They're creating because you know generating a random number is one of the hardest things for a computer programmer, because it's all about it's all about setting up a system where randomness should happen in a different way, not from a. So they're looking at all different things. So before I heard that they were using weather predictions. Weather is something very random, right? And recently I heard that they're using also like this kind of nuclear detection systems to create random values to contribute to the algorithms. So they're looking at all these different things, but still I don't see any like human input which can like meaningfully contribute to the social good of these cultural habitats. So I will be always on the pessimistic side. So you can.
I actually want to say something about the emotional flatness one, and I understand the point, but I kind of object to a little part in it, and which is very weird for me because I have an immediate dislike to everything that is flat. But in this case, I think you use the words objective storytelling, and I think, in my point of view, that is kind of impossible because you can't really tell a story and be objective at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So then there's no way that the things that you've been doing or the infographics that you showed us can be flat or objective in a way, because you're pulling that sort of information and creating these projects, and you could have picked something else easily, but you chose those and you curated them in a way that are now like you could take the same information and create it in a completely different way. I think, yeah, I understand visually maybe they are very alike, but I don't think it really changes anything when it comes to the storytelling part. I don't think it makes a difference on the objectivity part. Objectivity is impossible here, I think. So that's why I don't find them flat at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think at this it might be useful to historically compare the early photography with the information graphics, because when photography came, everybody was like, oh, this is very objective. It just documents really what is there. So no, it's not true. Like, you know, you can make all these different photographs and tell a different story, right? So, but it liberated the painting. So because of the photographs, painters were free to draw other things than the rich people, right? So they could go out and like paint whatever they like. They don't have to make portraits of the noble people anymore because they're having their photographs taken. So now I'm thinking that maybe all this data-driven graphics and information technologies are going to liberate photography, maybe. So every time I like go for the visa procedures, they have this like fingerprint scanners and retina trackers. So maybe next year I'm not going to have a passport shot on my passport, right? So it's going to liberate the photography. So in a way that that's the only optimistic part, that, you know, one more medium goes to the art side. Like maybe it's not, the photography is going to lose its document value. It's going to be like, it still is an art form, of course, but, you know, I think it's at some point it's going to lose all its document value, and it's just going to be for pleasure. So all the photographs that we're going to take, they won't have any. And, you know, you can observe this on like contemporary publications, right? Like, you know, decreasing number of photographs appearing on New York Times and the increasing number of information graphics. Or like recently I was looking at, probably you know Nicholas Felton and his annual books that he's designing. From 2005 to 2015, every year you see less photographs and more data-driven graphics. So, which means that yes, it's good news for the photographers. I think it's so their medium is being liberated by these things. But yeah, I'm still a little bit skeptical about the, you know, because it's totally not objective. It's as objective as photography, not more really. Because again, there are tons of aesthetic choices like the color and the, you know, which data that I pull and how do I map it, like all these things. So it's basically like taking a photograph, which camera, which point you like, which lens you use, how narrow you cut. Like it's all these aesthetic choices. Like at the moment that you start looking from the viewfinder, it's an aesthetic choice. So yeah, totally, they're not objective. And I'm happy if you don't find them emotional flat, that's really, yeah. I'm happy to hear that. Yes, please.
I mean, you have so much knowledge about what goes into these or this data, right? So for you, it might look flat because you know exactly what.
Mm-hmm.
But so let's imagine this. We didn't know anything. You didn't have came and you showed us that that slide.
This one?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Then it would be more like, okay, I'm seeing this because this is what I perceive.
Mm-hmm.
And then, so any type of information you don't have any type of object you see, or anything you really see, it's just, I have to guess. Well, maybe it was a five-year-old person playing with an Etch-a-Sketch. You know, like that's what I'm thinking. So I don't think it can be whatever, it could be a star.
Yeah. So yeah, the reason why I brought flatness is exactly for the same reason, because, you know, this image could well pass as the, you know, city bike maps that I showed earlier, like very useful commissioned project which has, you know, a lot of political implications and, you know, has a great use value, can exist on any publication, right? So if like, but this one has no caption because it's something like I'm trying to mystify and demystify to play around with, right? And so yeah, it's again like I think you're right. It's like any other art form basically. You can have infinite number of narratives around one symbol. So the only indexical, so this is like a phenomenon, and the reason why I was saying that we know that we used to know in 1970s, like it's the least progressive area. Nuclear science is the least progressive one, although it's considered as the high science. So it's the only indexical signification is when you squint your eyes, you see this a little bit, this electron. But yeah, you're right. It's totally like this can pass any other graphics that we reviewed all over the presentation.
I just wanted to ask something back. That the photograph, you see that it might be in the future just for pleasure.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think back, like it's an image of 1,000 words. And like when I look on, let's say, war photography,
Mm-hmm.
and I look on an infographic, I think the emotion is shared with this context, but the memory is stronger in photography. This is my point. Like, how would you
I think that's
the
a
emotional side?
yeah,
of
that's
capturing art?
yeah. I think that's a very important input, really, to this equation that I'm trying to solve myself, like within this like emotion flatness and temporal quality equation. You're right. The very important input goes into is the memory. We are kind of lacking up in the, or maybe the thing is that we didn't theorize it yet. We didn't put the name memory into databases. So the databases, we don't really conceive them as the memories, but the guy who is dying in the Spanish Civil War is memory, right? That's how we perceive it. Shot and that, and like, so, yeah, but it's important, really. Like, I don't have an immediate answer. I think it has to be in this equation, the what we call photography, and but I'm not sure if it is not going to work within the data-driven systems.
Both in photography as well as in data visualization. I feel like that both can be manipulated,
Mm-hmm.
like the way, the point of view you want to tell the story. Like my statistics professor always told me, only believe the statistics you faked yourself. So he was saying that you can't trust data at all, because there's always like you limit your sources, or you're always a little bit limited, and with, for example, the choice of sources, you already limit your story to a certain point of view. And
Exactly.
then you choose through the visual way how you deliver it. You also make like a choice.
Yeah,
Of,
exactly. It's like, we can never argue that
yeah.
whether data visualization or statistics are objective ways of
I mean, on the other hand,
presenting
you
a case.
You can manipulate photographs.
Yeah, the moment that you look through the viewfinder, the manipulation starts. So,
Yeah.
Any other comments or questions? I think we are just on time, right?
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you
Very
so
nice
much
to
for
meet you
doing this.
in person.
Yes,
Thank you.
yes. I have a question.
Sure.
It has nothing to do with your lecture. You were an advisor, a thesis advisor for one of our students
Yeah,
a few
last
years
year.
ago.
Yeah.
And these students are just starting their, well, most of them anyway, are just starting their thesis process. So I just wanted to ask you, what was your experience like as a thesis advisor?
I think it's it was my first time being an advisor at SVA, and actually I talked a little bit about
You did, okay.
No, I didn't talk about the thesis, but I talked about the program, being a designer as author and entrepreneur. And so I think that's has been very influential in practice also to read that small text, which Steve Heller wrote maybe 5 years, 6 years ago. It's about the changing role of the designer in the society, not only as a person who shapes information but also creates information. So I think the thesis is like a perfect. So I think the idea of making a thesis, a design thesis, and the idea of this program, designer as an author or entrepreneur, they just perfectly click, I think.
And it's for us also to have advisors, because there's so many faculty members and various milestones and requirements, but then also to get this outside perspective and view and help. It really does help them very much and enriches the thesis process. So, yeah, thank you for doing that, and I'm sure we'll come to you again requesting.
Sure. Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry I wasn't here when you were. Sorry, Stephen. I'm sorry I wasn't here when you